So good afternoon and good morning and possibly even good evening, depending on where you're calling from. My name's Al Wood. I'm from the Digital Curation Center, and I'll be hosting this session today. This is the FAIR implementation workshop on the Open Archival Information System version 3. What does it mean for repositories? So our FAIR implementation workshop series aims to help three key stakeholders: research platform organizations, repositories and data service providers, and national level initiatives to become familiar with FAIR enabling tools, approaches, and methods. Each workshop will provide an overview of a specific FAIR enabling activity, share information on recent developments, both from within FAIR Impact and other initiatives, as well as offering examples of good practice, practical tips, and recommendations. So what is FAIR Impact? For those of you who are joining us for the first time, potentially, you might not know who or what this project is. FAIR Impact is funded under the European Commission Horizon Europe program and is one of the InfraEOSC projects. The project builds on the work of the Horizon 2020 FAIR's FAIR project and is a coordination support action focusing on expanding FAIR solutions in Europe. The project itself has 28 partners from across 10 member states and the UK. We began the project back in June 2022 and we'll look to finish in May 2025, so just a couple months' time. So essentially, FAIR Impact is working to support the vision of a European open science cloud, where FAIR data can be shared and reused. Our work focuses on identifying current and emerging tools, methods and approaches, supporting their adoption. A key aim for us is to help ensure that useful resources developed by one community of practice can be adopted by others. And that's why the FAIR Implementation Workshop Series is a brilliant place to come, and welcome again for those of you just joining us today. So at this point, I can hand over to our first speaker, David Gioretta. He'll be talking to us about the history, the new version, relation to FAIR, preservation and sustainability of the OAIS. We'll be then hearing from colleagues Barbara Searman and Olivia Rucon before we go on to our WooClap online questionnaires. So please do have your devices to hand. We'll explain how you will join us for those sessions shortly. Okay, I'd like to unshare my screen now and I hand over to you, David.
Okay, thank you. I hope you can see my screen.
Yeah, we can.
Excellent. So let me just, so I'm going to talk about OAIS, a bit of its history, the new version, the changes, relationship to FAIR, and a few other things. So my name is David Gioretta. I'll explain a little bit about who I am, and you can see some websites that might be of interest. So, oops, just get in there. Here we are. So OAIS was written by a group in CCSDS. CCSDS is made up of space agencies with the aim of developing standards to reduce cost. The standards are developed by working groups. Now, I co-chair one called the DAI, Data Archive Interoperability Working Group. So we develop, and all the CCSDS, but we especially, develop standards in an open way. Everybody is welcome to our weekly video conferences, not just space agencies. And in fact, we've had members from all walks of life, from all different types of organizations. We've developed a whole family of OAIS standards and a few others over the years. And the point is that the purpose of the organization is to not just accept the documents that we produce, but to review them, get different viewpoints in at multiple levels within CCSDS and collecting comments and suggestions from around the world. But the key thing is we, the working group, resolve those issues in collaboration with those who've submitted the comments. And then it's finally published by CCSDS. But actually it's decades ago, CCSDS became a Class A liaison organization with ISO. So that means that our standards go into ISO in what's called a fast track process. What it means is it goes straight in as a draft international standard, and then it goes through the ISO review. But again, we, the working group, in collaboration with, it's an open discussion, we resolve what to do with those comments, whether to accept them, reject them, and so forth. So if anybody wants to join, then there's a link there. Oh, sorry, I've got, or you can just email me. Sorry, I had an interruption there. So we talking about OAIS, we began discussing this in, I think, the early to mid 1990s. Shows you how long I've been around. First version was published in 2002, the next one 10 years later, and now we've got this one, which is, heaven help us, 13 years later. So each time what we do is we get in comments, we create a new version, again, consulting very widely, and then put that in for these reviews that I talked about. And besides the hundreds of suggestions for changes, we then get hundreds of, comments and suggestions about this draft version that we put up. And you can see an example of this. That link provides gets you to a link of and you can see all of the exchanges about the discussion for each of those suggested changes. So the latest version, the reason it took 13 years, is that the organizations reorganized, and that caused problems, and in particular a number of additional reviews. Each review takes a long time, and there were also some procedural delays. So that's the excuse for taking so long. So talking about OAIS, the family, as I like to think about it, I'll put, if I can explain it reading from left to right. So data is created somewhere or collected. And the IPELTU standard, I'll describe briefly later, provides ideas, checklists about what extra information is needed to be collected in order to make sure the information is usable, preservable in the long term. I won't talk about the PAI standards. I'll go straight to OAIS, and that's one I'll talk some more about. It's ISO 14721, and it defines the techniques, the concepts needed to preserve any type of information. And from that, we wrote the ISO 16363 and 16919, which define how a repository can be audited. And on the basis of that, we developed an ISO audit and certification process, accredited by ISO, and you can see more details on that draft. The ones here, this one, the ones in gray here, I'll talk a little bit about. One is, well, actually, I won't talk about the interoperability framework, but I will talk a little bit about the maturity model. And the other ones down at the bottom left are some standards that maybe are not so useful now, but were designed to help create representation information, which I'll come on to. So let's get into it. In the new version, you can, there's a summary. Now, basically, if you compare version 2 to version 3, pretty well every page has been touched, but most are fairly minor. So this summarizes the major changes. So I'll go through most of these next. But the key one is to clarify the preservation techniques. So we used to, maybe you still hear it now, emulate or migrate was this is how you preserve things. It doesn't really work in general. So OAIS, even there's a separate section that talks about migration. And when we wrote it, we knew there were other techniques, but they were distributed in the standard. We thought it was fairly clear, but it still confused people. So in the new version, we've made things explicit. And I need to explain a little bit about that, because at any point you need to take action to preserve. And if I can do it this way, the object can either be kept by the archive, and you may be allowed to change from one format to another, or kept by the archive and not allowed to change. Okay, or you can guess the only one left is you don't keep the object, you give it to somebody else. And that's, I think, fairly exhaustive. So what do you do? These imply the following things. So in the first case, it's a form of migration. We're very keen on being precise about what we mean. So we call it a transformation of the digital object. But then you've got to think about the evidence needed for authenticity. So we work very carefully through that. Needed for the preservation. Then if you're not allowed to change the bits at this particular time, the only thing you can do is to add representation information to ensure that the bits are understandable. And finally, if you're giving it to another archive, you need to give enough. You need to give enough information for that other archive to preserve the objects. And in our terms, that's a complete archival information package, and that I'll come back to. So that's one of the changes, to be explicit. We like being explicit. So the other change is to do with the archival information package, or more generally the information model. And here you see version 2. The change in version 3 was this. From the preservation description information includes things like provenance and fixity and so forth. And on the other side, we've got representation information. And you saw, if I can go back, the change was the PDI refers to the data object. Now, this sounds pretty major, but in fact, this is actually what repositories do. They don't talk about the fixity of or the hash, for example, of the information object. They talk about the hash for the digital object. So, and now you can work through the details and you can see, if you do it consistently, that works. It's basically the same thing, but it's much easier to map it to what repositories actually do. And you can apply these concepts not just to the object, but also, for example, you need to preserve the provenance, whether it's a premise file, what's the vocabulary, or it's in some weird and wonderful way to capture provenance, or indeed fixity. But so this is pretty fundamental, as I said. The unfortunate thing is that a lot of the people who claim to have archival information packages don't. So I'll name the eArch archival information package, but the Archivematica, Preservica doesn't. They have some. I think it's an XIP, not quite clear, but it's pretty clear it doesn't have all of the components needed. So the point is that they claim they've got archival information packages, but if you actually try and map, you know, have you got a place for provenance? Where's the fixity? Where's the semantic representation information? You can't do it. So they're not suitable for preservation. And that's a pretty damning statement to make about all of these projects and products, but it's unfortunately true. It just about works for documents, but not for anything else. Now, let me continue on. The next thing we did, sorry if slight jumps in the narrative here, but we defined this concept of preservation objectives, because representation information and how much representation information is a key thing, is a key concept in preservation. So we introduced this so that people could be very clear about why they think they have enough representation information for their designated community. So we provide examples. We provide a lot more examples in version 3. And of course, this change had some knock-on effects in terms of the definitions of the other objects, in particular representation information. We did change the functional model just slightly, but and Barbara was one of the people who were very keen on this. And this is in the preservation planning to add an explicit box there called Preservation Watch. And this, I think, people find very, very useful because they've been using the term. It wasn't in OAIS. Now, to my mind, all of the activities were in OAIS, but it made a lot of sense to put it in one box and to describe it separately. So thank you, Barbara, and all your colleagues for kind of twisting our arms, and you stood there and made your case, and it was put in. So we did make a slight change to the definition of information package. It's a bit nerdy, I know, but it's entirely backwardly compatible with the previous definition, but it makes our lives a little bit easier for further discussion and some of the other standards. And then we introduced something, again, it was a concept that was used by groups in preservation called, I guess they called it the inner and outer archives. So this diagram is in the standard, and it's saying that, for example, the archival storage can be looked after by of OAIS 1 can be looked after by another OAIS, in this case OAIS 2. So we and this helped us not only to introduce this concept, but also to make clear that OAIS, people sometimes read it as if it had to be monolithic, but that wasn't the case at all. We didn't define an implementation of where things were. So this was a really good excuse to introduce these new concepts and also to clarify that misapprehension. So this and other concepts were put into that section of OAIS, and it allowed us to talk very clearly about what we mean. We also did something just for convenience, because we had references to other standards and how they fitted in with OAIS, and also a roadmap. But the problem was, when you've got so many years between versions, it's hard to keep those two pieces up to date. So we moved them into an online document, so they can be updated far more easily. So the implication for repositories, well, we think that updates will not require repositories to make any major changes. I mean, it's probably a good thing to add explicit preservation objectives, but you should know those in any case. So that should be minor. But of course, there are some other changes, and I'll mention some of the things you should already have been doing, which may not be good enough. So I'll talk about those a little later. And what we tried to do is to clarify all the concepts and give more examples that link to what repositories are currently doing, so that that makes it easier for repositories to understand, and also easier for them to map what they're doing to the OAIS concepts. It should be clearer what archives need to do, and it should be easier for archives to be clear to their funders and their users what they're doing and why they're doing it. And preservation objectives is one of those things. And it should be easier to provide evidence about conformity to OAIS and also to 16363. So what repositories should know about OAIS is, apologies, I don't mean to offend anybody, but I think people should take the time to download the standard. It's free, and actually read it, because a lot of people, again, I apologize if this sounds condescending or insulting, but a lot of people seem not to have read it. They just listen to people who claim to have read it. But when I listen to those people, they haven't read it either. So it's sort of, I mean, please read it. Read what conformance actually means. It's a very short section, 1.4. It talks about the information and mandatory responsibilities. And if you're talking to a vendor or a presenter or a consultant or anybody like that, and they only speak about the OAIS functional model, and they only speak about formats, and they don't say anything about things like semantics, my advice, last piece, is ignore them. Run away. Never talk to them again. They don't know what they're talking about. So enough of that, and I rant. So I'll talk now about OAIS and FAIR. FAIR, you'll recognize these words. FAIR doesn't really talk about preservation at all. But it does have a lot of metadata. Metadata is so confusing unless you're clear. So I'd like not to use that word. So OAIS didn't really use it. It's about preservation, and I think there's some overlap there with FAIR, because there's an implication in FAIR that, the information is there. It wasn't created this instant some time ago, and it should work into the future as well. So it really depends on preservation, and OAIS has information model, in particular representation information, and it has other concepts, finding aids, which we hope are pretty clearly defined, access rights, that are useful for FAIR. And I think you'll see an application of this in a short while. So there is overlap, and I think OAIS concepts can help. So one of those gray circles was a maturity model, trying to bring together preservation, FAIR, and also a few things about sustainability, not of the standard, but of the archives. So the maturity model sort of tells you how to go from something fairly basic and simple to something that's much, much, much better. And there are a lot of areas in which this improvement has to take place. So the levels of maturity, we've come up with these. If you don't like these, join the group, make your argument. And so here are some examples. We've got a designated community. It starts with, no real community, and it goes up to something needed for a trustworthy. And then we're looking beyond that to what we call future facing. And most of that we're still racking our brains about, and we really want people to join us and help us. Reusability, what you can see in the red there, the FAIR requirements, lots of metadata. What we put in is something based on OAIS having these concepts of representation information networks, designated communities, talking about other things that come from OAIS 16363 and elsewhere, but not simply saying metadata, because I think people have a lot of problems trying to understand and implement there. Here's interoperability, another of the initials. So again, red, lots of metadata. What we're trying to do, this is not final, this is just a draft, talking about, again, representation, information networks and provenance for reproducibility. You can read these separately later. And talking about environmental sustainability, there's a lot to be added there. I apologize not to be able to talk some more about it. But let me continue on to IPELTU. This is the last thing I'll talk about: information preparation to enable long-term usability. That's kind of includes preservation. And we've taken inspiration from the project management and the data management book of knowledge. They're great books if you read them, and their trick is to break a big thing down into lots of repeating smaller things. So down at the bottom you can see a project broken into phases, and each of those phases has a number of blue bubbles, and within each blue bubble there's an initialize, a planning, an executing, and a closing. And you can have things working in parallel or in sequence. And what we're trying to do is to define what additional information is needed at each of these, at each of those initialized, planning, and so forth. And we can map this to, creating a space mission, mapping it to what the space agencies do, or we create checklists. So here's one, you'll recognize data object representation information from OAIS and some information that's needed to be collected at each of those: initiating, planning, executing, closing. And there are things outside the OAIS and to a certain extent, including FAIR. And then you can apply it to the pharmaceutical industry for some phase of a project. You can apply it to libraries, in this case, digitizing documents and making it available. Each of those are phases, and at each time these are checklists. So to give people a hint about what they should be thinking of, the additional information to collect in order to make sure that collected information, created information can be used, preserved in the long term. So a very rapid, just over 25 minutes. Thank you. Please join us in DAI. Everybody's welcome, but you have to be prepared for the long term. Make your case. There's the link, or just email me. So thank you very much. I can stop sharing now.
Thank you, David. I'm now going to hand over to Barbara Seaman. I'll share my screen for you now.
Yes, thank you. Yes, my name is Barbara Seaman. I worked as a digital preservation manager at the KB National Library of the Netherlands. And now I'm retired and working on a history of digital preservation book. In this talk, I will tell you something about some misconceptions that are related to OAIS, and I hope to put some light on them. Can I get the next slide? Yes. Well, David briefly introduced OAIS, and when OAIS was developed 30 years ago almost, the world of information was a different world. The World Wide Web was just started and very small, and all kinds of organizations like libraries, archives, data repositories, and research libraries, they all were trying to figure out how to deal with what they called in those days electronic information. We would now say digital information. In 1996, a report was published by the research RLG, Research Library Group in the US, together with the Commission on Preservation and Access, and it was called Preserving Digital Information. It was a report was made by a large group of various disciplines, not only libraries and archives, but also computer scientists, publishers, a lot of people from universities. And this was the first overview of all kinds of issues related to digital preservation. And it was a very influential report, and also worked as an inspiration for the OAIS reference model. It was a kind of guidance, at least it was a first attempt to give some guidance. But since then, and since the OAIS model in 2002 was published, a large community of users implemented OAIS and looked at it and read the standard. And so OAIS is accepted in a wide range of disciplines. It's translated in several languages, so Chinese, French, Spanish. There are trainings on how to understand OAIS, and there is frequent discussion about OAIS, for example, on the IPRES conferences, but also in other articles. So it really has a status in the world of digital preservation. And the great benefit of OAIS, it's a shared language amongst digital preservationists. Almost everyone knows what you're talking about when you use the terminology from OAIS. But there is also some criticism about OAIS, on OAIS, and some criticism is valuable and might end up in a new version of it. But some criticism is, in my opinion, based on misconceptions. And I want to discuss a few of them because we only have 15 minutes. So I want to discuss a few of them with you if I get the next slide from Elle. So the first misconception is that OAIS is for space agencies. Well, David introduced the origins from OAIS and mentioned CCSDS and the Data Archive Interoperability Working Group. But in the 90s, as I mentioned, the 1996 CPA RLG report was there to influence the OAIS. And it was also an activity of the group that created the OAIS model to organize meetings to get feedback on the first versions, so in the end of the 90s. And in the meantime, in several countries, for example, in Europe via European projects and in Australia, national libraries and archives and data centers were having projects to look into the problems of digital preservation. They used OAIS, they gave feedback based on their practice from that moment, and they sent it back to the OAIS working group. So what I would stress now is that OAIS was not started in isolation in a space agency. There was a lot of other organizations representing a very large group of disciplines concerned with OAIS and gave their feedback. So that was in the 1990s. As David also introduced, there are ISO procedures every 5 years, officially, the standard is reviewed. And the review is done by the national standard bodies. Well, a national standard body, every country or most countries have a national standard body. The idea is that the national standard body represents that country related to that standard. And I know from several countries, for example, also in the Netherlands, the National Library or the National Archive is a member of the national standard body. And in that way, they can give feedback on every new version of or ask for a review of a standard. So that's a current way of having influence, apart from the matters David already mentioned, to have an influence on the review of the OAIS standard. So in summary, OAIS is the result of the input of various disciplines in the past and now. Next slide, please. Another misconception, in my opinion, is that the phrase you hear some people saying, OAIS is for archives, meaning governmental archives. And I think that has to do with the original terminology as it was used in the 90s. In that report, what I mentioned from the CPA RLG report, there is a definition what they call a digital archive. And the definition starts with a digital archive is a repositories of digital information that are collectively responsible for the long-term accessibility, instantiated in digital form. So here they refrain from the governmental archives. They mentioned repositories, organizations with a digital archive, a digital collection. And that definition is broadened, I think, in the OAIS standard. The name archive is still used, but the addition was that OAIS speaks about the organization. So it's larger than the small repository in itself. It's the organization around the repository, which may be part of a larger organization of people and systems that has accepted the responsibility to preserve information and make it available for a designated community. Well, the designated community really is a terminology from OAIS. So the OAIS is not only for what we call archives in the traditional and more limited definition, but it's for all digital repositories with a long-term commitment. And we can discuss about the word long-term, but well, you can say it can vary from 10 years to 100 years, and it depends on the kind of data you are preserving. Next slide, please. The other thing is, and David hinted to that as well, the misconception that OAIS is a functional model. Literature quite often has a picture of the functional model of OAIS when they speak about OAIS, and they limit that to the well-known diagram of the SIP, the AIP, and the DIP. But OAIS is more than that. Basically, the standard has 3 parts. The mandatory responsibilities, so the responsibilities of the organization with the repository. And yes, indeed, the functional model is, this is what most people understand and use and are hinting at when they speak about OAIS, and the information model. And that's a crucial part, as David already mentioned, describing the kind of metadata. Well, if you don't want to use the term metadata, you can say it's the love note to the future, as Jason Scott said, but the kind of metadata you need to collect as well. My last misconception I want to discuss is the phrase, my system supplier will take care of OAIS. Often people refer to their supplier of the digital preservation system for compliance with OAIS. And suppliers often advertise that their systems incorporate the OAIS standard, for example, by naming the functional model, the concept of the SIP, ARP, and DIP, and the required metadata. Rhoda, Libnova, Preservica, Archive-Metica, Dataverse, etc., they all mention OAIS. But OAIS is more, and this is related to the organizational requirements, the mandate, the responsibilities, the interaction with the producers and consumers of your system. And to be a responsible partner in these matters, a thorough knowledge of OAIS in the organization is required. You need to be able to discuss with the supplier on an equal level, with the same level of knowledge of OAIS. So my conclusion is everyone involved in a digital preservation should have knowledge of the concepts of OAIS 2025. So I would suggest start reading. Thank you.
So I'd like to hand over to Olivier Roucon, who is our next speaker. Olivier, you're welcome to take the floor.
Yeah, thanks. You hear me okay? Yeah.
Yes, I can hear you fine.
Okay, great. So my name is Olivier Rouchon. I work for CNRS in France, probably the largest research performing organization in the country. I am the manager of the CNRS institutional repository called CNRS Research Data, but I'm not going to talk with this hat on today, as I'm also the chair of the Core Trust Seal Board. And what we'll see in the next few slides is if OAIS is a standard, it can be relevant as a repository manager to try to assess how compliant you are with that model or that standard. So we can move to the next slide, please. So the Core Trust Seal is a lightweight certification framework that sits at the bottom of 3 stages certification framework, starting with the Core Trust Seal, as I said, then with an extended certification based on the Nestor Seal, and the ISO 16363 that David mentioned earlier in his presentation, which is the formal certification. The level of complexity goes higher as you go to the top. We start with 16 requirements for the Core Trust Seal and end up with more than 100 requirements. And because of that complexity, the higher you go, the less certified repository you have, of course. And this framework is intended to certify the trustworthiness of digital repositories. So they are all the certification mechanisms are based on requirements and assessment performed either internally by the repository or with auditors, like with the ISO formal certification. The Core Trust Seal started in 2016, I think, with the merging of 2 certification initiatives led by the World Data System, WDS, and the Data Seal of Approval, which merged, as I said, under the Research Data Alliance umbrella, which eventually endorsed the newly formed Core Trust Seal as a recommendation. So since then, it's a sustainable certification mechanism. It's been a not-for-profit foundation based in the Netherlands. The certification is granted for 3 years, and we have some periodic reviews of the requirements. I'll come back to that later. Next slide, please. So the process to get the Core Trust Seal certification is to perform a self-assessment based on 16 requirements, where you will self-assess the level of compliance that you have with these requirements. You will submit this self-assessment on application management tool, an online tool on the coretrustseal.org website. Then you will have some reviewers, 2 reviewers assigned to your application that will conduct a peer review, potential revision based on the feedback from the reviewers, and then eventually a board review that will grant the core trust seal for 3 years. So next slide, please. So as I said, 16 requirements split in 3 different sections: organizational infrastructure, digital object management, information technology, and security. So you would expect that the commonalities with the OAIS model would be in the digital object management and information technology and security sections, but not only, and I'll demonstrate how later. So what you have on the screen are the requirements version 3, which are valid until the end of this year. So as I said, 3 sections, one for the organizational side of things, with the description of the mission, how you guarantee a continuity of service, what's the governance and resources, etc., etc. Something more bound to the digital object itself and how you manage it, with provenance, preservation plan, quality assurance, workflow description, and something really technical with the description of the storage, the technical infrastructure, and how you address security issues. So if we try to do some kind of, I'm not going to say a mapping, but if we try to see how the CTS requirements sit into the OAIS model, first you need to know that all these 16 requirements are fully described in a core trust seal extended guidance, and this extended guidance is available online, of course. It explicitly refers to the OAIS model. OAIS is cited as a tag maybe 3 times in a document, so that's more or less says it all. And if we move to the next slide, I'll show you how the core trust seal is quite close to the OAIS information model. So basically for the requirement number 2, which is about rights management, we can see that the access right information is a genuine section in the preservation description information level in the OAIS information model. So that's at least one commonality. We've got more with the requirement number 7 of the core trust seal, provenance and authenticity, because in the OAIS information model, we have the provenance information within the preservation description information. And moving forward, there's the preservation plan, requirement number 9, which of course refers to the representation information like file format description, metadata schemas, things like that, but also, of course, the preservation description information. We've got the requirement number 12, discovery and identification, which is bound to the descriptive information in which we will have metadata such as persistent identifiers in order to identify uniquely a data object. And last but not least, R14, storage and integrity, where you would find some description of fixity information, and fixity information is a subsection of the preservation description information. So as you can see, a lot of commonalities. There are probably more, but I wanted to highlight the most obvious ones. There's also some commonalities with the OAIS functional model. That's the next slide, please. And it's even more obvious, I would say, because the requirement that we have in the core trust seal for the deposit can be seen in the ingest function. The preservation plan is also bound to the preservation planning function, and it's pretty much the same with the quality assurance that can be described in the ingest, as well as the discovery and identification R12 and the access function. We also have the archival storage, which is bound to the R14 and storage and integrity. So as you can see, a close relationship. So how does OAIS changes may impact the core trust seal? Let's move to the next slide. Well, as David said, most of the changes are in the information model, where there are some clarification and rephrasing of the description of the representation information, preservation description information, and also in the functional model. Following a few reads of the new version of the model, there's no significant impact on the core trust seal requirements. But even if there had been some significant impacts, we are just at the beginning of the revision of the version of the requirements that are in place at the moment. So if we move on to the next slide, you will see that what we've done in the last couple of months with the core trust seal board was to review the application of the previous 3 years, the previous period, and also we read the new version of the OAIS to check for potential changes that will impact the requirements. We have now drafted some changes, additions, clarification. We will survey our community. So like the OAIS revision, the core trust seal requirements revision is also a community effort. It's not something that the board will impose, but we will survey the community, get the feedback, and incorporate that feedback in the final version. We plan to do that community survey between May and September, roughly, and we'll have a final version of the version 4 of the requirements by the end of this year, and it will enter into action by January next year. So what are the next steps on the next slide? It's to discuss these requirements with the community. So we view the RDA core trust seal maintenance group as a good place to have those discussions. We also have some other bodies like the EOSC Long-Term Data Retention Task Force, also the Fair Impact project today to discuss those changes. There are also a number of new projects kicking off, like the Fidelis project, where we could discuss this as well before we have a consensus of a final version. That's pretty much me done on the subject. So I think that we'll have questions later. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Olivier. I think at this point, we're going to move on to the WooClap at this point. So what you'll need to do on your mobile device or on your laptop is to type in wooclap.com and enter the code IFPHOF. If you do have a device to hand, I'll go to present a QR code for you. So you can scan the QR code, or you can simply type in the wooclap.com into your browser and use the event code IFPHOF. We'll have 5 questions that our panel will speak to, and we will show the results as we go through the questions here. So I can see we've got 165 of you in the room, 57 of you now in the room. So I'll just give you a minute to join in. Just to let you know, there's going to be 5 questions, and our team will be speaking to the slides as well. Okay, I can see the majority of you have joined in now, so I can move on to the first question, which I believe David, you'll be speaking to. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. So it's perhaps would be tempting to say, yes, of course we can preserve a spreadsheet, but what I was trying to indicate was it's not just being able to print a table. A spreadsheet normally has some semantics. For example, I might say a preservation objective is to know whether I can add column A to column B. Does it make sense? Or is it, okay, they might both be numbers, but maybe one is the number of apples and the other is the distance to um, uh, uh, where that apple is. Does it make sense to add those two numbers together or not? You need the semantics, or the spreadsheet might have a formula in. What does the formula mean? Does it make sense? Can I change the formula? It depends what my preservation objectives are, but it's certainly more than off. Let me put it this way. If I said my preservation objectives is simply to be able to print out the table that's in the spreadsheet, would that be enough for you? And if it is, then maybe that's okay, but I suspect that the people who gave you the spreadsheet to preserve would not. So anyway, with that as the context, I hand it over to you to vote.
Thank you, David. So when you do have your device, I can see a few people have just joined. You simply need to enter wooclap.com into your browser and use the event code IFPHOF at the top of the screen. You can click on one of the options and you can add a comment to this as well. So I can see the majority of you have voted already. David, would you like to speak to the results, or would you like to wait for a few more of our colleagues to vote, perhaps?
No, I don't see the results.
Here you are.
Ah, okay, not at all. Well, that sounds realistic. I don't think so. I'm not sure. I think so. Well, that's interesting. Absolutely. My goodness. So that's what's that? 43%. A good number of you think that your system can preserve a spreadsheet. I mean, the reason I talk about spreadsheets is I seem to remember colleagues in Australia used to sell preservation by saying it's really you're preserving it for your future self. And the example given was, well, you created this spreadsheet a few years ago. Can you still remember what 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 everything means? Does it still make sense to you? I mean, I've written spreadsheets with Visual Basic in, and I'm a bit hazy on some of the details. So I'm very surprised that so many are so confident, but I'd be interested to see what you think, why you think that is the case.
We can certainly open up a few of the comments here as well.
Oh yeah,
This is the I think so piece.
Ah, okay. Excellent. Well, okay, I can see some things in there by keeping the spreadsheet in its original format, but it still doesn't help with the semantics.
One is interesting, the spreadsheet that called data from other sources.
Oh yeah, that was the other obvious
That's
thing, yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, there are, especially these days, there's what used to be terribly simple formats like Word. They're really containers that and links to that drag in information dynamically from other sources. So some of those I think so comments may be okay. Others I really despair. So without wishing to embarrass everybody, those who made the comment, I think you should really read OAIS and think again.
Well, and discuss it with your peers.
Yeah, or feel free to.
There is no one solution, but it is.
Well,
we are all in the same boat, I would say.
Feel free to email me. I'd be happy to discuss it. So is there anything else anybody else would like to say? Barbara, Olivier?
No, I think I said what I wanted to say.
I'd love to know which people said absolutely. 11 people said that. Wow.
I think at this point we can move on to question 2.
Yeah, that's for me, I suppose. So yeah, the question is about if you have a repository to preserve digital objects, how much, well, do you rely on external information for your preservation? For example, when you've got data sets or file, you will try to identify them with a pronoun ID, for example, or assign them a persistent identifier like a DOI or etc. And all those information are external to your system. So the question is to try to figure out if you really rely on those external information and what could happen should these external sources cease to exist.
Thank you, Olivia. I'll let a few more of you vote before we reveal the results, the live results that we do have here as well. Thank you for contributing and being so engaged with this discussion as well. Again, for anyone who's just joined us, you just need to enter wooclap.com into your browser or into your mobile device and type in the event code IFPHOF to access this questionnaire. So I'll just open and show you the results now.
Right. So I would say that the immediate reaction is that these results were quite expected, right? We all know that we need some external information, like I said, persistent identifiers or description of file formats, things like that. But what we need to make sure when we implement some preservation plan is that as David said earlier, we don't have to have a repository that is monolithic, right? But it needs to be at some stage standalone. So you need to figure out what's the risk of losing external information should the resource provider cease to exist, and take some action plans accordingly.
We can go ahead and explore some of those comments in those that did answer yes.
Mm-hmm.
But by the way, can I just add a related question to what if it goes away is what it provides reliable? For example, my favorite used to be like Pronom. If you look at what it tells you about what a TXT file is, it is absolutely useless. It might have changed, but it used it used to be completely laughable. And the DOIs is interesting because I remember talking to Larry Lanham, and of course you have to pay. And I asked him, well, what happens if you stop paying? If somebody stops paying, does he delete their DOI? And he said, well, he hasn't yet. Because all of these rely on activities or some systems to resolve names, which may or may not go away.
Well, I remember we had a lot of discussion about the sustainabilities of these organizations. Pronom had one instance when they threatened to stop with Pronom and only use it for the National Archives. That has changed, luckily, but still a lot of organizations are dependent on that, and we have no security that they will exist and stay in their existing. And the same for DOI. So it's a problem for almost every preservation organization, and or an issue or a challenge or whatever you want to call, but it's something we need to think about. It's not only our own repository, but also our dependencies. And I think, well, if this question has motivated people to think about it, it would be nice.
Yes, I mean, I did ages ago try and persuade the EU to basically buy the handle system and provide that as a service, because it's just so important. It wouldn't cost very much, but instead it's basically a commercial service, or I mean some are, or it relies on projects in universities, and who knows when that funding will run out. But yeah,
it's quite clear that a lot of I'm not going to say, a lot of external information is used for representation information, and this kind of information is really critical to be able to represent. So it's really crucial that repository manager pay a lot of attention to this information if it's external. Because say, for example, if you have a few thousand of PDF version 1.2 and you can no longer access the specification of this version of the format, how will you redevelop a tool that's able to read those documents? So yeah, that could be that could have a big impact.
Yeah, I agree. But as I say, reliance on X-FMT-111 is absolutely useless. I mean, is it ASCII 7? Is it UTF-8? Is it Unicode with some code point? it's really hopeless.
Okay, at this point, I'll move us on to question 3. I don't know if anyone wanted to add to this question at all.
Sorry, El. The point is that we first wanted to have a reply to this question, and then comes the explanation. It's a reverse order question.
This makes a lot more sense, Barbara. Thank you. Let's see the results and let's speak to that, shall we? Perfect.
Oh dear.
I'm glad that people are honest.
Yes, it's quite depressing.
Well, there is a world to win, one could say.
Yeah.
And hopefully we have, at least I tried, because I was muted by my own system. I tried to persuade people to read it, but I don't know whether the next question explains why we asked it.
Of course, we can move on to the next question now.
Yes, I think so. Yes. It's about the sustainability of the standard. The OAIS, as you can see, is a conceptual standard. And in the time it was created, there was not so much practical experience with a digital repository. It was 30 years ago. So now there are hundreds or thousands of organizations working with a long-term preservation repository. So you can imagine that there are new insights now or in the future that will help people to better phrase certain elements in OAIS, because they have practiced it more than it was 30 years ago. Hence the fact that, for example, the preservation watch function is now added to it, and that came from a Escape project in the, 2010 or something like that, when we thought, based on our experience, that the previous description in the OAIS about your technical environment, watching your technical environment, was too limited. So that's based on the practical experience, and I can imagine that practical experience will have more, could have more influence on the standard itself, and helps to keep the standard up to date and in line with your practices. So the first thing to do that, to be able to do that, is that you read OAIS. That's why the first question was started. And I think, yes, well, I like to see all the explanation of your ideas about how to keep the standard alive in the future.
Yeah, I would say that it would be really great for people to join DAI.
Yeah, and there are more ways to join. You can DAI or have a good discussion with people, or write down your insights and present it on a conference or whatever, then and discuss it with peers and colleagues. I think it might be difficult for people to join DAI because they are not sure whether they are right or wrong. So before that, they perhaps can start discussing it with their peers, and then bring the advice. Oh, this is another way of saying the same things, Al? Yeah, share of use cases, yes.
Yeah, there's a comment there about, the more perfect OAIS is, the more difficult it is. I don't think that's the case, at least I hope not. I mean, it's telling you what is the best, but of course we didn't, that, and you can map some sort of conformance, but there is no auditing of OAIS. The audit is done in 16363, using 16363, and there it's not a question of perfection, it's a question of, is it good enough? And how can it be improved? So, you want, I mean, if OAIS is perfect or gets to be perfect, great, but it's there. If you're not doing everything that it says in the most perfect way, that's okay. You're still good enough, because preservation is, is it going to be preserved for the next year and the next year and the next year? And each year you can be audited and improvements can be made. That's how ISO works. So I think it's rather foolish to say, oh, well, it's too difficult, because, as I say, if a car mechanic said that and he was looking after my car, two things. One is I would remove my car from that garage. The second thing is I would tell the owner of the garage to fire that mechanic.
Well, I have another view on that, on the perfect
Good.
of OAIS. Well, as I see OAIS, it's a conceptual model. So
Yeah.
it's a concept. It's not a prescription. That's what I tried to say in my presentation.
Yeah.
So what I in the past I often said, well, you need to do things in the spirit of OAIS. Look for the spirit. What is the intention with the OAIS? And how can you achieve that in your daily practice with your data? Because you know your data the best. And look at how that is can align with what OAIS describes, and what is the spirit behind it. What's the intention of OAIS? What do they want? Does OAIS want to achieve? So, and yes, I agree. It's not not a matter of being perfect in OAIS, but to understand the elements of OAIS and why it's important for your repository.
Yeah, the other thing I think it's important to say is this, that last one here is reuse of digital objects. Well, I would not put that in OAIS. That could easily be another standard. Because if you try and put absolutely everything you can think of in one standard, two things. One, it never gets finished. And secondly, it'll go out of date very quickly and cause all sorts of problems. So, I mean, there was mention of DNA storage. That makes no real difference. It's as long as you can retrieve the information. OAIS is in a sense sort of independent, as Barbara was saying, of the technology and the implementation. But there could well be other standards that perhaps provide advice about passive digital preservation using DNA. Outreach activities, well, I'm looking at this meeting as one of those activities.
Just conscious of time now. I'll just move us on to the last question. And thank you for everyone for your contribution so far. Yes, and at this point, it is are there any questions or comments you'd like to share with the speakers on this topic? We'll leave this question open. So when we do finish, we will keep this slide open. So when we finish up in 5 minutes or so, you're welcome to continue to vote. And we'll get back to you with answers on your questions or comments as well. As Micah said earlier in the presentation, all of the slides and the recording for today's session will be shared with everyone. So do please add your questions and comments into this section, and we will endeavour to get back to you as well.
Much, Al, for explaining this. We'll make sure that all the speakers have a look at everything that comes in, and we will revisit insights with you. And I think also the purpose of what Barbara and David and Olivier have been trying to emphasize is get in touch with each other to talk about this, and that is how we keep OAIS alive together and amongst us. And now we have quite a full room of people who all care in some capacity about the topic. So it might be a very nice opportunity to continue these conversations yourself and with each other as well. Al, are you able to switch over back to the presentation to wrap things up?
Can I just say there's somebody from Australia who asked why I said bad things about the word metadata. The reason I say it is that people from different communities use the word in different ways. And all that happens is you get confused. I've wasted years arguing with people in different communities about what we meant by metadata. And so what I prefer is to use the OAIS terms and only use metadata when I'm sure that the person I'm talking to will understand what I'm talking about, or if I just want to include everything data about data. But for any detailed discussions, avoid it like the plague.
Thank you, David, for the last bit of advice here.
And, well, somebody else asked about they have a repository and who can they talk to? Well, there are a couple of answers to that. One is just email me, but the other one is if you're serious, then you can if you go to that ISO 16363.org page, then that will provide some extra details, and you can even get some paid for advice. I mean, I can give some advice for free, but of course, things get complicated and consume time. So if it's just a simple thing, I'll do what I can to answer.
Thank you for that. And now to wrap up in these last 2 minutes, because we are very conscious that Fair Impact as a project is nearing its end, we wanted to briefly share with you in this context 2 new projects that are very good for you to know about. And they're like Fair Impact and Fair Core for EOSC, again, sister projects called Fidelis and EOSC Eden. So EOSC Eden will focus on enhancing digital preservation strategies at the EU level and also at national levels. And they will create a framework to identify candidates for digital preservation. And they will also work on building curation networks and do all kinds of great stuff to get more insights on specifically those topics, which are very, very important for preservation. And its sister Fidelis will work in the next 3 years to establish a network in Europe of trustworthy digital repositories, which will focus on setting up the network, harmonizing repositories and their practices together, and also building very strong peer knowledge exchange and support and training activities. So those are two to follow. The websites are, there will be one joint website for both projects and it launching very soon. For now, there's some information on the slide and the link on the slide about the projects, more to come. And on the next slide, you can also see an invite to join a landscaping survey that's currently ongoing, to share your opinions on things that are important for us in the projects to work around. So if OAIS is one of the topics that you think we need more training and support on, or more harmonization on as repositories, then make sure to let us know in that way. And then I think there's only one more slide, because while Fair Impact is almost over, it's not fully over. There's still a couple more Fair implementation workshops to join. So I believe next week we have another nice one for you. Yes, about the HUNREN Research Data Repository Platform. So we're looking forward to that one and hope that you can join us there. So huge thank you to David and Barbara and Olivier for speaking today, and an incredible thank you to all of you who joined us and the lively chat. We'll make sure to save everything and digest it as we go into the evening and the next couple days. So thank you so much for joining us, and see you at the next one.